What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Stu Hine Show. And on today's video, I'm joined by a special guest host of the Section 111 podcast, TJ Shoemaker. How you doing today, TJ?
Man, I'm good. I appreciate you having me on again. It's good to be back on, and I can't wait to talk some Florida Gators with you.
Have a lot to talk about with Florida. Florida plays next week. It does not seem like it at all. College football actually starts this weekend. Have not been, talking about Florida or, college football as much as I wanted to. So far, lots of things have come up. But obviously, this season for Florida, there are so much high expectations. Obviously, last year was a disaster, to say the least. 6-7. Dan Mullen gets fired. So many different games that they should have won. They just played horrible and they lost. So much things to look forward to, with especially Billy Napier, new head coach from Louisiana. In my opinion, I'm not trying to be biased. I think it was the best hire in college football in the offseason when it comes to head coach-wise. I think it was 100% the best possible hire Florida possibly could have done. Because with Napier, let's say if they would have hired a guy like Lincoln Riley, the expectations would have been sky high. And if they don't win a championship every year, it's a bust. With Napier, since he's not that, top, coach that people are talking about, the expectations aren't quite as high. So if you're not having a 10-win season, people aren't freaking out. But if you do have these 10, 11-win seasons, maybe winning the SEC East, people are talking about you. I mean, the work that Napier has done in Louisiana this past several years, I believe each of the last two seasons, they've only had one loss. There is so much to look forward to with this Florida team, and it starts with Napier. To me, I think he's going to do great things for Florida, not just, this year, but for years to come.
Yeah, man. I think at first you had me on the podcast right before he was hired, and I kind of said that was kind of the guy that Florida wanted, and that's who they went out and got. And I think that since he was hired, I think that he's only kind of solidified that belief of him being the right choice for the head coaching position. And you look over the things that he's done the last couple of months, whether it be on the recruiting trail where Florida's been as hot as anybody, landing several 4-star prospects, mainly within the state of Florida, which I think was huge. That was something with the Dan Mullen regime that really didn't make sense, where you have so much talent right in your backyard, and you weren't even tapping into that to try to improve the roster. So I think from a recruiting standpoint, Billy Napier has been fantastic up to this point. Obviously you've got to hold on to the guys that you have and continue to recruit until signing day. But I think so far it's definitely been positive. And on the on the flip side, when it comes to the team right now, I think that getting someone fresh, especially with a guy like Billy Napier and his character and just everything about him and just his approach, I think that was important for this Florida team to have, because, like you said, last year they kind of just fell apart and gave up. And I think it was more of a mental thing. So I think that Billy Napier is the right guy to keep them in the right mindset, throughout the season and not let them lose focus to where they have another collapse like they did last season.
And when you look at this Florida team now, it's like you kind of mentioned with recruiting, it already seems like Napier's done a better recruiting job than Mullen has even remotely close. The recruiting that Napier's already done is really crazy. And it's really crazy, when you look at Napier, he's not these top, coaches like a Lincoln Riley or something like that. But the fact that he's this guy on the rise and people are wanting to play for him kind of, to me, really speaks volumes for how respected he is and how good of a coach he is. When you have these guys who, instead of going to USC with Riley or some of these big, programs, Brian Kelly with LSU, some of these guys, they opt to choose for Florida, who, sucked last year. It really shows how good Napier can be. And you kind of mentioned, with recruiting, honestly, I don't follow recruiting a whole time, but, obviously a couple of these recruits for Florida have potential to be really good. Kamari Wilson, one of the best safeties, in recruiting, according to Sports Illustrated, was the third best safety. Look at a guy like Shamar Jones. Some people say was the best linebacker. And also a guy like Chris McClellan. I think I said that name right.
Yeah, McClellan.
6'4", 300 pounds. That's absolutely huge. I was looking at wow, I'm the same size that guy is, and he's But looking at Kamari Wilson, I love that. I know he plays safety, and Elam played corner, but it's great getting these guys. Florida secondary was not good last year. You look at it, there was only one player that had multiple interceptions. And the fact that you get Wilson to get more experience and a guy, doesn't have experience right now, but he can be a huge part of the future with Napier. You look at a guy like McMillan, like I just mentioned. They lost Zachary Carter last year. It was a big, piece of their defense. He's going to, kind of be the replacement for Carter. A guy like, Shamar Jones. You look at him, Ventral Miller, to me, I think he has potential to be a first-round pick, possibly. Only played 2 games this past season due to injury. 2020 season, he was absolutely phenomenal for the Gators. And, he's a guy coming back. He's going to be super excited to be back on the field. Coming off injury, has so much to play for. Once he leaves, Shamar Jones can kind of take his spot. But the recruiting for Florida right now, it is so much better than I think kind of people expected it to be.
Yeah, I mean, the guys that you mentioned, Kamari Wilson, Shamar James, and Chris McClellan, those are 3 guys that are going to make an impact this year as freshmen. They might not be in starting roles right away, but they're going to be in the rotation and, get that early development. And like you said, I think they're going to play a vital part into what Florida wants to do in the future. And I think they're going to be a big reason for that success. Kind of getting more onto this recruiting cycle. I mean, some of the guys that they recently brought in, it's not like they're just taking guys to be taking guys. I think Billy Napier is a guy that really believes in their evaluations and everything. So sometimes the evaluations match up with the stars, on the recruiting sites and stuff like that. But that's not always the case. But I mean, it is a good feeling as a Florida fan knowing that we are able to pull some of the guys that, are in consideration with going to Alabama or Georgia and those type of places. So, I mean, the fact that Billy Napier is out there battling on the recruiting trail and not afraid to go head to head with the top dogs, kind of, that was kind of a knock on Dan Mullen, was that Florida fans kind of felt that he was a little bit afraid of that. But with Billy Napier just kind of, putting his head down and going to work and really attacking the recruiting trail, it's kind of been a really nice breath of fresh air.
And when you look at Napier, to me, I feel like something that he really fits, this Florida team for. When you look at his time at Louisiana, they were known for running the ball down your throat. You look at a guy like Trey Regis, running back who's really good for Louisiana. Had his more rushing yards than Elijah Mitchell. People don't really talk about it. There was a long period of time. I mean, you look at Elijah Mitchell's stats, they were great. At times, he wasn't even the number 1 running back for Louisiana. And it kind of shows you they love to have 2 or 3 running backs, and you look at Florida. I mean, Florida only had 1 more passing touchdown than rushing touchdowns last year. It's you look at Florida's quarterbacks last year with, Emory Jones and Richardson. Both of those guys were mobile quarterbacks. And you look at, Pierce and Malik Davis and some of those guys. But now when you look at Florida, they had a terrific transfer to me. People love to talk about, the, recruits. They had a couple of phenomenal transfers. A Louisiana running back and Montreal Johnson, who played with Billy Napier at Louisiana. In his freshman year last year, he had over 800 yards and 12 touchdowns as a freshman in the Sun Belt. I've said this multiple times, different people throughout the past couple of years. 100%, in my opinion, I think the Sun Belt is easily the most underrated conference in the country. And I mean, getting 800 yards and 12 touchdowns in a very difficult conference is very impressive, especially splitting carries with some of these other guys. Another transfer they got from Arizona State, a wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall, over 45 receptions, over 550 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Florida's lack of wide receivers last year, they have some guys, but some of them, transferred and graduated. But, not only are they getting, positions they need, they're getting guys who are really, have experience, kind of know the system, and could be huge pieces to Florida's offense, not only this year, but for kind of the next couple of years as well.
Yeah, I mean, Montreal Johnson, you mentioned his stats. I mean, he was the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year last year. So you bring him over and pair him with Lorenzo Lingard and oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank here.
Naquan Wright.
Naquan Wright, my goodness, I can't think of that. Yeah, Lorenzo Lingard and Naquan Wright, you add him into that room, and all of a sudden you've got a 3-headed monster. And, it could have been a 4-headed monster had DeMarcus Bowman not transferred out to UCF. But, best of luck to him. But back to the transfers, I mean, Ricky Pearsall is another guy that was super experienced at Arizona State. And, whenever I heard that he was in the portal and Florida was looking at him, I looked up his highlights and stats and all that stuff, and I was impressed. Since he's been on campus, that's been a guy that the Florida staff has just raved about. So I think he's actually going to have a bigger role in this offense than we initially thought, and a bigger impact than we initially thought. So I think that getting him back today, actually from a bone bruise in his foot, he had been out the last 10 or 12 days and hadn't practiced, but he came back today. He was running, looking healthy. So I think that he's going to be a vital piece to not only the season, but especially that week 1 matchup with Utah.
And you look at, getting Pearsall, something else that I think is really important. When you look at a guy like Anthony Richardson, who hasn't had many starts, he was a freshman last year. You want a guy Pearsall, who has experience. So it's really important to me to get, it's nice getting recruits, but I think it's really great when you can get transfers who can make an immediate impact, who have already been around college football for a couple of years. And especially, getting experienced weapons for Anthony Richardson, to me, I think is really good, because when you look at last year, Justin Shorter had 40 receptions for 550 yards, a couple of touchdowns. Got a guy like Henderson, 25 receptions, a couple of touchdowns as well. Like I said, some of these, weapons kind of, some of them graduated. A guy like Copeland, he transferred. But when you look at this Florida team, they have a little mix of everything. They have a couple guys who have potential. They have some transfers, experienced, good transfers. They have guys who are going to make, big impacts. The potential really for this Florida offense is really sky high, because they have a great passer in Richardson who can also run. We've already kind of talked about the running system with Napier. They have these experienced wide receivers. This offense could be really, really good. And I know people, like to talk about, Richardson's not really started many games and stuff like that. I think this Florida offense can be, better than people give him credit for this upcoming season.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that one guy that we're forgetting is the offensive lineman transfer that came with Billy from Louisiana, and that's Osiris Torrance also. He's actually the one guy that is receiving all the preseason accolades for Florida. He was deemed a preseason second team All-American. So I think that Florida already had a pretty experienced offensive line and was going to be good anyways. But I think you throw Torrance in there, and all of a sudden that offensive line can be a very big strength. So, with that offensive line, Anthony Richardson's ability to run, and then you have a 3-headed monster at running back, I agree that this offense will be much better than it was last year. And I think, there are some young receivers that we have, but I think, they'll kind of come along as the season rolls on. And the biggest thing with what I think will happen this season that didn't happen last season is I think that Billy Napier is going to kind of put Anthony Richardson in a position to be successful. Last year with Dan Mullen and Emory Jones, I felt like Mullen really was trying to put a square peg in a round hole, making Emory Jones a pure passer. But, there were times where he threw 36 to 40 passes a game. That's just not what Emory Jones does. So, I don't think it was kind of a fair shake for Emory last year. I know he received a ton of heat, including, from myself at times. But I think that if Billy Napier will put his guys in the right position, I think that Florida could really be successful. And, I keep referring to this week 1 matchup with Utah, but that's just a huge monstrous game that could really dictate a lot the rest of the season.
That game is going to be huge. I think it's way bigger than people are making out to be. We'll kind of talk about it here, shortly. But, you mentioned with Mullen and Emory Jones, that's something else. You look at a head coach and a quarterback. It's so important that you have chemistry between your head coach and the quarterback. And your head coach and your offense coordinator, whoever it may be, they always need to play with their quarterback's, strength. If a quarterback cannot throw, 40, 50 yards, have them, throw 10, 15 yards, stuff like that. The fact that Mullen wasn't really able to do that last year with Jones kind of speaks, volume. And really, it was time for Mullen to go. But when you have a guy like Napier who's, run heavy, and a guy like Richardson who, he's shown he's more than capable of taking the ball and running than rather passing. But he's also shown he can throw, amazing, deep balls as well. Mm-hmm. It's going to be great for Florida. And, kind of talking about the offense, looking at the defense here, and, they bring back Brenton Cox, who had 14.5 tackles for loss last year. Ventral Miller, kind of talked about him. I'm super, super excited to watch him play. To me, I kind of feel like Ventral Miller and Richardson are my two favorite players I'm looking at this year to see how good they can be. They bring back Trey Dean, had over 80 tackles last year. Osiris Torrance had 3 interceptions last year. But when you look at this, Florida defense last year, it was god awful, and it's so weird because the 2020 season to last year, for whatever reason, it just has not been the same like it has been years in the past. Obviously they fired Todd Grantham last year.
Mm-hmm.
Look at it, their defense looked like it was worse, and now you look at this defense as horrible as it was last year. There's high hopes for this defense because one, I mean, you get people like Miller back, you get some of these recruits like Kamari Wilson. This defense is not going to be as bad as it was last year. And when you look at this offense, it's very underrated. And the fact that this defense can step it up, especially compared to last year, I mean, I really feel like this Florida team is underrated. I feel like they can. I don't think they're going to win the SEC East, but I definitely think they're capable of being second in the SEC East this season.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Ventral Miller. That was a guy that actually led Florida in tackles in 2020, and then missed most of last season with injury. But you get him back. You actually lose Mahmoud Diabate, who actually transferred to Utah. So we'll be seeing him week 1. But I feel like, not to discredit him or anything, but I feel like his tackling statistics were a little bit skewed, I guess you could say, because he's really not a guy that likes to, take on a blocker and shed the blocking, make the tackle. He was kind of just a guy that was, like a little late to the party in some sense, or they were just literally running right into him. Essentially, he didn't really have a whole lot of tackles for a loss. They didn't blitz him a whole lot, which was kind of surprising because I thought he was a better kind of edge rusher than he is a true linebacker. So like most of his tackles were just kind of him just being able to meet the running back in the hole. But when you think about this defense, especially from last season, the crazy thing is this defense actually had a top 10 pass defense last year. They were number 9 in the country. But when you factor in the run defense, which is where, I think a lot of those opportunities for tackles came about was because teams knew that they could run on Florida, and that's what they were trying to do. And, you look at how Kentucky, was able to run down their throat. You look at LSU, how LSU, it seemed like they ran the same counter play about 30 straight times before Todd Grantham decided to change the defense up. So I think a lot of this defense's issues were just a lot of it was on coaching, obviously, but then some of it was just kind of disciplinary type things, making sure you're getting the call in. And then as a player, you've got to be able to get lined up before the snap. I mean, that was something that Florida did time and time again. And that was just mind blowing that they couldn't get lined up before the snap. So I think with Patrick Toney, who's the defense coordinator, who's a young mind and one of the up and coming coaches in college football, I think that he is going to really make this defense take a step forward and basically just make them a lot more disciplined. And I think his stamp on the defense is going to be the difference. And I think you're going to see more of the kind of 2018 or 2019 Florida defense as opposed to the 2020 or 2021.
Now, you mentioned the 2018 Florida defense or 19. I said this yesterday. I was talking to somebody. I am 100% convinced if you give the Florida 2020 Florida team, the Florida 2018 or 2019 defense, they are 100% national champions. Like you look at that Florida 2020 team, it makes of all the years their defense sucks. It has to be the defense. It makes no sense. It was so frustrating. But like even last year, look at the games like, especially early on, like it's so weird. You watch, like you see the score, box score, you might not think of it, but games like even early on, like FAU, they won 34-14, and South Florida, they won 42-20. Like, they didn't give it many points, but you actually go watch, and some of those games, like those games were actually way closer than score indicated. Like their defense was not good those games.
Mm-mm.
It kind of indicated like I mean, they're playing kind of crappy against FAU. Imagine how it's going to be against, LSU giving up 40 points and freaking, Stanford 52 points. I don't know how that's even possible. But, with this Florida team, with their offense and defense, I really think it's, underrated. People really aren't talking about it enough. Kind of looking at the schedule here, it really should be interesting. You kind of mentioned the Utah game. I think that is a major indicator on, how Florida would do this season. Let's say if Florida beats Utah, I think we're kind of surprised and like, holy crap, we thought Napier was going to be good, but if he's beating Utah his first game, maybe we're going to be better than we think. But look at some of these other games here. Let's see here. Kentucky, South Florida, Tennessee, Eastern Washington, Missouri, LSU. With bye week, Georgia obviously playing them, and Jacksonville, at A&M, South Carolina, at Vandy, and at Florida State. So kind of starting with Utah, what are your kind of thoughts on that game? Who do you have winning that one?
I think where Anthony Richardson is kind of a new starter and Billy Napier as a new coach, I think that kind of plays into Florida's favor a little bit. I don't think that Utah has the film and everything that they need to prepare for this game. And I know that Utah is the higher ranked team, as Florida's not even ranked at the moment. But I think that when you look at the talent gap, although Utah is definitely a team that always, plays better than their talent suggests and their recruiting rankings suggest, I think that Florida's speed and athleticism, along with the accountability and discipline that this coaching staff is going to bring, I think that this is a game that Florida is going to come out with the win, and especially playing in the swamp. I think that it's going to be an environment and climate that Utah is really not going to be used to playing in. So I give the advantage to Florida here. I think it's going to be close, but I like Florida to win this game.
To me, this is really tough. It's really a 50-50. When you look at Utah, they lost some of their defensive leaders last year. They lost Devin White. And look at Utah. They were in the Rose Bowl last year, nearly beat Ohio State. They have Cameron Rising, a very underrated quarterback, had 2,500 passing, 500 rushing, 20 passing touchdowns, just 5 picks. One of the more underrated quarterbacks to me, kind of heading into the season. It's interesting because when you look at the Florida side, it's good that obviously this is great that it's in Gainesville. You look at it like Utah doesn't really have any tape on this Florida roster, and it's its first game. But you also look at it like Florida, there's kind of a disadvantage as well. Like this is their first game playing with each other, and it's against a really good team like Utah. Like there's you got to take the good with the bad. To me, this is really a toss-up game. I'm going to give Florida the loss, but I would absolutely not be. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida came out with the win. If they did come out with the win, I expect this team to be kind of better than we thought it was kind of going to be. But this game is a really, really big indicator on how this Florida team will kind of perform this upcoming year.
Yeah, I'll say this before we move on. I was looking at the depth charts the other day, and it kind of surprised me that when you look at Utah's offensive and defensive lines, they've actually got a lot of youth, a lot of sophomores, a couple juniors, very little seniors. Which when you think of these, I don't want to call them lower tier because they're very good Pac-12 teams. So when you think of teams like that are have playoff hopes, usually those teams are super experienced and loaded with seniors, and that's really not what I saw on the depth chart. Now, I'm not sure if it was 100% accurate, but I was going through different teams that I kind of knew depth chart wise, and it seemed to be relatively accurate. So based on what I saw, they've got a lot of youth in the trenches, and that's just not a place that I think you can have youth in. So I think Florida's a little bit more experienced there, and that's really the main reason why I'm leaning Florida here as opposed to Utah.
Should be a great game. The second game this season, they play Kentucky in the Swamp. I think that should be. I don't think it's going to be as good of a game that people make it out to be. Kentucky is ranked 20 heading into the season. I think Florida is going to beat them bad. I think Kentucky's overrated. You look at last year. when Florida played Kentucky last season, Kentucky only beat Florida by 7 points. It was 20-13. If we had Richardson at starting that game and playing that game full instead of Emory Jones, that game would have been over by halftime. Emory Jones played absolutely horrible that game, and Kentucky still nearly lost the game. Like, we gave Kentucky time after time after time to pull away with it, and they never did.
Yeah.
I think especially if we don't lose against Utah, we're going to beat Kentucky. We're going to beat Kentucky regardless, but I'm very, very, very confident they'll beat Kentucky here in week 2.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not ready to say it's going to be a blowout, but I think that Florida could win it in a somewhat comfortable fashion. Like, I don't think it's going to be like a last second win or a last second hold on to the win type situation. But one thing to note on that game is Kentucky's running back Chris Rodriguez is actually going to be out for that game due to disciplinary reasons. So, that's a huge loss, as last year I felt like he absolutely killed Florida, especially, third and short. Kentucky just gave him the rock and he was able to pick up first down time and time again. So I think that's a huge loss and advantage Florida for sure in that regard. But I think this game could also they could feed off of that Utah game a little bit. So if they do get that Utah win, I think Florida has all the momentum going into that game. And I don't think that's going to be a good week for Kentucky.
I think we've kind of talked about this before, but it's so crazy. You look at, when Florida hired Dan Mullen. At that time, you look at the win streak Florida had over Kentucky. It was something crazy. And then you start looking, Mullen's record against Kentucky, like, it's over 500, but Kentucky's won multiple times. And you look back, there was a couple of times where, Florida nearly lost. Beating Kentucky was a regular, but under the Dan Mullen era, it was kind of a 50-50 shot. And that kind of seemed like, if he can't beat Kentucky, a team we beat for so long, maybe he wasn't the right guy, for the job. And obviously, he ends up getting fired. But this, I feel very confident Florida will end up beating Kentucky here in week 2. Let's see here as we continue here. In week 3, they take on South Florida. They played South Florida last season, 42-20. South Florida was 2-10 last season. I don't think this will really be close. If they won 42-20 last year with a horrible Florida team, I expect it to be maybe even worse. I expect this to be an easy win here, and I feel like Florida after this will probably be 2-1 on the year.
Yeah, win for Florida. Something kind of notable though is Gary Bohannon, that was at Baylor last year. He's actually the quarterback of South Florida now. He was just named QB1 the other day. So, I think that South Florida does get an upgrade there at quarterback, but I don't think that South Florida has the horses to hang with Florida. So I'm giving Florida the dub.
Next game here, they play at Tennessee. Tennessee was 7-6 last year. They beat Tennessee last year 38-14. Tennessee is one of those teams who it seems like they're always around that 7-5 range. For whatever reason, they're always around there. This is another game. I feel like the fact that Florida dominated them last year with just a horrible roster, and the fact that we only held them to 14 points when Florida had a god-awful defense, this is another one of those games I expect this to be. Maybe they don't beat them by 24 points like they did last year, but I still fully expect a Gators win here.
So this might come as a little bit of a surprise, but, I think that if Florida beats Utah, beats Kentucky, I think they're a little bit on a high horse, and I actually think that this is a letdown spot for Florida. Tennessee is not a team that Florida's been, used to losing to. They've owned the series over the past decade and a half, but I think that this is a spot that if you catch Tennessee on the right night where Tennessee's offense is firing on all cylinders like they're capable of, I think that it could be bad news. So I'm gonna say a loss here, and I don't feel comfortable with that prediction, but I'm gonna say loss because as I look at the schedule as a whole, I'm trying to just kind of do it a game at a time, and I think that this is a letdown spot, and I think that of the few games that I think we might drop, I think this could be one.
I do like that prediction. I don't have them, losing there, but I do have, a game I'm kind of going back and forth on, having them lose a game that they kind of shouldn't. But when you look at college football, it seems like every single year, except pretty much Alabama, a team always loses a game they shouldn't. God, look at how many games, we should not have lost last year, but we ended up, doing last year. And it's kind of crazy, but I understand what you're saying. You look at a team like, they have a hot streak. You don't want to get, too, overconfident in a way. But that game, it should be interesting, but I think Florida will come out with the win. The following week, they play Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington was 10-3 last year. They averaged 44 points a game, but their starting quarterback is no longer on the team. I think this should be an easy win, but at the same time, we gave up 52 points to Stanford last year, so you never really know. But I think this will be a Florida win here against Eastern Washington.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't see a Florida loss, but if it does, we might have to do an emergency podcast and and talk about that one.
Next game here, they play Missouri. This game to me is interesting. You look at last year. They lost to Missouri 24-23 in overtime. Missouri was 6-7 last year. I think Florida will win. I would not be shocked if they lost. Something that I don't really think is really being talked about enough. I always like, looking at history, coaches between battling out against each other. Obviously Missouri has Eli Drinkowitz. He used to be the head coach at Appalachian State. Obviously Napier coach at Louisiana. They both coach in the Sun Belt. In the 2019 season, Napier and Drinkowitz, in his lone season at Appalachian State, they coached against each other twice. Drinkowitz beat Louisiana's Napier team 2 times that season. The first time was 17-7, and the other game was 38-45. So I want to see if Napier kind of has revenge on Drinkowitz because he kind of had his number for the time being. I think Florida will win this game, but I think that kind of history is interesting. But I think this could possibly be a game. Maybe Florida stumbles, but I'm going to have them with a win here against Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri is a team that Florida, for some reason, usually struggles against. But I'm going to go with the Florida win here, too, especially if Billy Napier thinks that Eli Drinkowitz is as annoying as I do. Then I think that he won't let Florida lose this game. So I'm going to give Florida the win here.
Braden says losing games they shouldn't is the Bengals' specialty. Amen to that. Sweep the Ravens, sweep the Chiefs, sweep the Steelers. Let's lose to the freaking Jets and Bears.
Yeah.
Makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
But let's see here. Next game, to take on LSU. This game, I don't know. Brian Kelly, to me, he's like, I don't know. Like, I kind of want to say family, like how Brian Kelly says it. With his accent. But the LSU last year, they were 6-7. Of course, they beat Florida like everybody did. They beat them 49-42. I think Brian Kelly's overrated. I thought he was overrated at Notre Dame. I think he's definitely going to be overrated at LSU. If you're not great at Notre Dame playing inconsistent schedules, you're definitely not going to be great in the SEC West playing, Alabama and those other teams every single year, playing teams like Georgia or Florida every single year. This is one of those games, a toss-up. I feel like I do think Brian Kelly is overrated, but I feel like he might have the coaching advantage because he's coached far more years than Napier has. This could possibly be one of those games like a wake-up call to Napier. Like, he is a great coach, but some of these other, guys who are more experienced than him kind of, simmer down a bit. You're going to be good, but for the time being, we're kind of going to beat you in a way. This is tough. I'm going to give Florida the win. I'm trying not to be biased. This could really go either way. I'm going to give Florida the win against LSU.
Yeah, so this is a battle of 2 teams and 2 coaches that are trying to provide some sort of structure and stability and accountability and all those things to these teams, because Florida and LSU have been 2 of the most undisciplined teams the past couple of years, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So this is definitely going to be a toss-up, but I'm actually going to be in attendance for this game. I'm going to be flying down to Gainesville the day before, or I'll actually be flying into Tampa, driving to Gainesville. But I think at that point, Florida and possibly LSU, I think Florida, though, is going to kind of know what they've got. And, providing no injuries to Anthony Richardson, I think this could be a game where he really takes off and could possibly make a statement. So I'm going to go with Florida here by a slim margin. But I'm only saying that because I'm going to be in attendance and I'm going to be screaming my butt off. So
that is super, super cool. I've been to, I think 2 Florida games, Missouri years ago. I think Marco Wilson, he had like 2 or 3 picks. And I went to
Any shoe throws or anything?
I have Vietnam flashbacks with that. I feel like I should get like the Austin Powers, like Jeff, who throws a shoe?
Yeah.
Like honestly, but yeah, I've been to that game, and I went to A&M several years ago. It's so crazy because like
Nice.
you go to a Bengal game, like it's really cool, but I don't know what it is about Florida. It just seems like a normal game can be like it's like a playoff atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like, it just seems so crazy. And it's super super cool. I was looking at tickets for that Utah game. I mean, if they were close, I'd totally go to that. Like $60 for Utah. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. I actually thought about going to that game too. The flights were kind of outrageous, so I actually thought about just renting a car and driving down. But I'm actually going to be going to the Marshall and Notre Dame game the following week, so I was like, I don't want to be, away from home too much during that time. So I'm going to stay home and go to the Marshall game that week. So I'll catch it on TV.
Braden asked you throw a shoe. Yeah, Marco Wilson threw a shoe against LSU. I also said this yesterday. I 100% believe if Florida wins that game against LSU, even if they lose to Bama, they would have been the first ever two-loss team in the playoffs. I know that's kind of a bold prediction, a bold statement, but I really feel like Florida could have been that first two-loss team in the playoffs in the 2020 season.
Yeah, I mean, it could have happened.
But, the next game here, you mentioned Notre Dame game. I want to go to that game so bad, but I don't think I'm going to, which, sucks because, look at that. That's one of Marshall's biggest games ever.
Yeah. But, I wanted to go just to say that I've been to Notre Dame Stadium and stuff, just with the history and everything. But I don't know if it'll be something where I ever go back. But, at least I can say that I went.
Super, super cool. The next game here, Georgia. This is where they have a bye, and then Georgia. Now, I want to, not be biased. And, obviously given a loss here. Georgia defending champs. Ranked number 3 heading into the season. They lost 34-7 last year. It is so crazy. I was kind of looking at the box score the other day. There was only 1 yard on between passing and rushing yards between these two teams. 1 yard that separated them last year, which you would not think that at all because when you watch this game, it was god awful. It was one-sided the whole game. Like you wouldn't not expect the offensive stats to kind of be that close. I expect this to be closer than it was last year, but I'm not confident in Napier and Richardson enough yet to, be crazy to say, they're going to be Georgia. This would, to me, be their second loss of the year. I just don't think they're there yet. Next year, maybe. But right now, I think it's too crazy to say they're going to be Georgia.
Yeah, last year, this was Anthony Richardson's first start, against arguably one of the best defenses ever assembled. So, it wasn't exactly fair for Anthony. But this year, I think that, by this game, he's going to be, obviously much more experienced. And, the bullets will have been flying for a while at this point. So I think that it's going to be maybe a little bit closer than people think. But I think that this is a game that Florida's going to lose. And so this will be the second loss, in my opinion, with the first coming to Tennessee.
Next game here is at A&M. This is really interesting because going back, I've kind of mentioned them a couple of times now, but the 2020 Florida team, that was a special offense, but they were not able to beat A&M. And to me, that's kind of my thing with this. If Kyle Trask, Pitts, and Tony weren't able to beat A&M, I don't really think this Florida team can beat A&M right now. I think A&M is overrated. They should not be number 6 right now. It makes no freaking sense. They're 8-4 and they're ranked 6th. That's the type of stuff you would see from like USC and like teams like that. Like A&M, yeah. Who's like the second or third best team in the SEC West. They lost Isaiah Spiller. They lost their leading sack leader last year, Marvin Leal, and their quarterback transferred to Auburn. Like, could I see Florida winning this game? Absolutely. But I feel like I kind of talked about earlier, you see these, experienced coaches like Brian Kelly and Jimbo Fisher, these towards the top coaches in the country. Billy Napier is not really used to coaching against those coaches. I'm going to give them a loss here, but I do think it's possible Florida gets the upset against the Aggies here. But I am going to give them the loss.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Texas A&M is a little bit overrated. I think that them and maybe some of the media is still kind of riding on that Bama high from last year. So I think that this is a winnable game for Florida. it's hard to say what their injury situation might look like, with this coming the week after Georgia. But playing at A&M, is obviously not favorable. Playing against the 12th man, I'm going to go with a loss here as well, with it being the third of the season.
So them losing to A&M and at A&M here, that would be my third loss. I had them losing to Utah, Georgia, and A&M. You kind of mentioned earlier how you had them losing a game they shouldn't, and that was against Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
They played South Carolina last year. They lost to South Carolina 40-17. This was another one of those games. Like, how did this happen? And they lost that game by South Carolina's third string quarterback started that game. Like it made no sense.
Yeah.
South Carolina was 7-6 last year. Beamer has showed promise, at South Carolina. I think he has potential to be a really nice coach in a couple years. I'm going to have Florida lose this game. I know it's kind of maybe an unpopular pick. I think Beamer's underrated. I think the South Carolina team's underrated. And you kind of mentioned, I expect great things from Florida this year, but you're always going to have, pretty much a given. Every single year, you're going to have just a slip-up game that you lose, and you really shouldn't. And I think this is that game for Florida this year, that they should not lose that game, and they end up losing.
Yeah, I mean, this time last year, I think the team had kind of given up. But I think the coaching staff had also kind of given up. I really like Shane Beamer, and I think that South Carolina is really heading in the right direction. They've been recruiting very well recently, and I think that the transfer quarterback from Oklahoma that they just brought in,
Rattler.
Spencer Rattler. I was super high on him going into last season. He kind of let me down a little bit, but there were still times where he flashed potential. So I think that Spencer Rattler does kind of provide a little bit of a different dynamic than South Carolina is used to offensively. So this, I don't hate that pick, with this being a game that they could lose. I'm going to say that they get revenge this year after being so embarrassed last year at South Carolina. So, they're at home. I think they're going to get the revenge win, and I'm giving Florida the dub.
I could definitely see Florida winning this game. This is one of those just slip-up games. Like, it seems like, all teams have them. And, have them losing kind of the obvious teams, with Utah, Georgia, and A&M. I mean, those are kind of, I'm not going to say given losses, but if they lose, it's not really shocking. This is kind of that, one shocking loss they have. Next up, after the South Carolina game, they play at Vandy. The shutout Vandy last year, 42-0. They did not score at all against Florida's god-awful defense last year. That's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, if it was 42-0 last year, it could be 56-0 this year. I mean, they were 2-10 last year. This will be this could be their biggest margin of victory this upcoming season. Maybe even over Eastern Washington. I really don't know. This is going to be over by halftime. This will not even be a contest at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually thinking about going to this game. I know it's not going to be a great game to go to, but the fiance wants to go to Nashville, so we might go down a day early, kind of get to explore the city and that type of thing, and do some fun stuff while we're there, and hit the game up on Saturday, and hopefully catch a good one. But when I say good, hopefully not close. Hopefully, by good that means Anthony Richardson putting up 8 touchdowns or something. But
Vandy, do not even think it's going to be close. They closed it out at Florida State. They won last year against Florida State, 24-21. And this is kind of another one of those games. They gave up 21 points to Florida State. Florida State wasn't good last year, but with all the situation, Mullen gets fired. Grantham's gone. The players have nothing to play for, honestly. I mean, except the rivalry. And they're able to pull the victory, and they still kind of only give up 21 points. And you're like, they gave up 21 points to a crappy team. Okay, that is true. But they gave up 52 against Sanford and, so many other points against these crappy teams. This is kind of another one of those games, their defense is much better than people think. That defense last year will not be seen this year at all. I really feel like this Florida team will end up beating Florida State to close out the regular season this year.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think that this new coaching staff and the new approach, I think that this team is going to be so much more disciplined than they were the past couple of years. And on the flip side, when you look at Florida State, this is Mike Norvell's third season, and in the first 2 years, he hasn't been able to kind of instill that discipline and accountability in his players yet. And I mean, if you haven't done it at this point, I don't know when that's going to happen. So I think that Florida's going to get the win on the road at Doak this year, and I just don't think that Florida State has the capacity to put it together for a whole game against a team with this kind of talent and like I keep preaching, with this discipline. I think that Florida's gonna win this one, probably by a fair margin.
And when you look at Florida State, you mentioned Mike Norvell. This is going to be his third season. So his first season was the 2020 year. And to me, I feel like that's kind of hard to judge coaches because, I mean, that was just a crazy year for football, but just everybody in general. I mean, last year, I kind of feel like last year was his first true season in a way as the head coach. But like you said, this year, it's kind of make or break year. And if they don't win, let's say 7-8 games, I could definitely see, if he gets fired and Florida State just gives Dion a blank check. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the next head coach at Florida State. And then, I mean, Billy Napier against Dion 3 or 4 years ago, never really thought that see happen between Florida and Florida State, Billy Napier and Dion. That would be crazy. Yeah,
well, and I mean, back to like, the discipline and the focus and everything, not only during Mike Norvell's tenure, but when you go back to Willie Taggart's tenure too. By this point in the season, that Florida State team has already given up, and we even saw that last year. I think that it's kind of, I don't want to say it's been instilled in them, but it's just like they don't have the pieces in place to really put it together for a whole season, and especially for a whole game at the end of a season. So, this isn't so much me saying, "Oh, Florida's so great." It's really me saying Florida State's just not a stable program at the moment. And by this game, Mike Norvell could be on the hot seat or even fired, depending on how the year goes. So you never know. You never know what's going to happen by November or end of November. But I think Florida gets the win.
Should be interesting there. So that was the regular season. So what's your overall regular season prediction here, record wise?
Okay, so I've got Florida going 9-3 with the losses to Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas A&M, and then I've got Georgia and Alabama meeting again in the SEC championship, and I think the Alabama is going to win that and will be in the college football playoff. And I think Georgia probably drops another game somewhere. I don't know where. I haven't really broken that down yet and put a prediction together, but I think that Alabama is kind of a team that you can pencil in the playoff at this point.
I feel like right now, college football playoff wise, I think Georgia's going to be good, but I don't think they're going to be as good as last year because they lost a lot of players. I feel like it's Alabama and Ohio State because C.J. Stroud, I mean, you look at Ohio State last season, but to start the year last year, they were the youngest team in the country, and look how great they were. I think, it's going to be really good between them two. I think those are kind of the top teams, but with Florida, being in the SEC, no game's really easy except if you're playing at Vanderbilt. But looking at it, I want to see. I think they're going to be 8-4 and then 5-3 in SEC play. I don't know. I haven't done SEC East predictions, so I don't know where that would be. Any SEC East, probably second, but the losses would be to Utah, A&M, Georgia, and an upset against South Carolina. So obviously, so much high hopes for Florida this upcoming year. Do you have any bold predictions for Florida this year?
A bold prediction, not anything too crazy. I mean, I think that I say this, like I actually know something, but I feel like Florida is just going to be a little bit better than people think. I don't think they're going to be, a team that, is competing for the SEC championship in year one under Billy Napier, but I do think that they're going to be a team that really surprises people, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think that this defense is going to be vastly improved, and I think that that's going to put them in a position to win, maybe a game or two where they shouldn't, So I think that, like you mentioned earlier, that A&M game, that could be a game if Florida can generate enough stops and give Anthony Richardson and this offense opportunities, that could be a game they win. So, overall, I just think that you're going to see an improved team and a more disciplined team than we saw the past 2 years.
I don't really have any crazy bold predictions. When you look at Florida last year, they only had one more passing touchdown than rushing touchdown. I'm going to say they get more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns this year. And the reason I don't think it's that crazy because we kind of talked about, the run expectancy with, Billy Napier, how much he loves to run the ball. So I don't think it's really that bold. But it should be interesting. So, kind of doing these Florida predictions, you had them 9-3, I have them 8-4. What is your ceiling and floor for Florida this year?
I would say the ceiling is probably 11-1. I feel relatively confident in the loss to Georgia, but I feel like everybody else on this schedule, those are winnable games. I don't think that there's any other team on the schedule that is like, hands down going to be better than Florida this year. But it is a tough schedule. It's a tough start to the season. So I think that that's going to dictate, what happens the rest of the year. So I think if you get a win under number 7 Utah, that's going to be, huge for the rest of the season. And that could really set the tone. So we'll see how it goes. But I just think that, Florida has the potential to go 11-1, but their floor to me is probably, I would guess 8-4. I feel like my 9-3 prediction is pretty fair, but I think the floor is probably 8-4.
When you look at the Florida schedule, I have them 8-4, with losses to South Carolina, A&M, Georgia, and Utah. But kind of like you said, the only really given loss is Georgia. I said, Utah is kind of 50-50. They're capable of winning. A&M, I think they're really overrated. I think they're capable of winning. South Carolina's that, one loss, maybe they just screw up and, play bad. But if that doesn't happen, you look at a completely different, record. I think 11-1 is the ceiling. To me, I feel like the floor, I want to say the floor is 7-5 because you look at those games. Like I said, Georgia's given, A&M, Utah is a toss-up. Maybe they lose to LSU. Do I think it'll happen? No, but with Brian Kelly's coaching experience, I feel like that can kind of, play in a factor, coaching up against a guy like Billy Napier, who's, he's been a great coach, but, coaching in the Sun Belt, then coaching in the SEC against LSU, against Kelly, who is overrated, but he's a good coach, is completely different. So I'm going to say my ceiling is 11-1, but my floor for Florida this year would be 7-5.
Yeah, that's fair.
So much, to look forward to for this Florida team. But, we kind of said this last year, and I don't know if you know this, didn't really turn out too well last year for Florida. Really sucked. But this year should be good. New head coach Napier going to do great things for Florida. Not only this year, but for years to come. You have any kind of final things on Florida this upcoming year?
Yeah, just one more thing. I think that people kind of forget what happened from the Jim McElwain to Dan Mullen era. That transition, it was kind of reminiscent of each other because that last year under McElwain, the team just kind of quit. They fell apart. They quit. They were just terrible, to put it bluntly, towards the end of the season. And then enter Mullen the next year, and they win 10 games and win a New Year's Six game against Michigan. So it's one of those things where I think Florida, yes, they were really bad last year, but just like, that 2017 to 2018 season, they have a roster where I think that with, just a little bit of stability and accountability that they can really, flip the script and improve vastly and have a pretty good record. So I think that we're going to see kind of a similar thing happen, and at the end of the season we'll obviously be able to look back and see if this prediction was right. But I guess you could say that this is the boldest prediction that I have for Florida, is that they're going to be much improved and more reminiscent of that 2018 first year under Dan Mullen than they were last year in Dan Mullen's last season.
I would do anything for the 2018 defense for 2020. I already said it, but that made me so mad. But when you look at I agree with what you said there. When you look at this Florida team, the past couple of years, when they've had a good offense,
Jordan, you're cutting out on me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, when you look at Florida, like the fact that they're
Jordan, I lost you again. Okay, there you are.
all right. So
Sorry, keep cutting out.
Can you kind of tell some of the listeners we can follow you on social media?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at tshoemaker2423. On there, I'm a little bit personal sometimes, but mainly I just like to get on there, talk sports, and just I feel like on there you get to hear or see me, be a little bit more myself, than on a podcast. I'm a little bit more, laid back and try to be a little bit more professional. But but yeah, you can follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, I know nothing about professionalism. If I think something, I'm just going to go out and say it. But yeah, definitely follow TJ on Twitter. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're new to the channel or if you've seen my videos before, make sure to like this video and subscribe. I would really. Okay, first of all, I was about to end this, but Brayden brought up a good point. Slim Chickens is better than Raising Cane's.
No.
Have you had Slim Chickens before?
I've had Slim Chickens once, and it was good. Nothing special. I feel like whenever I go out of town, going to Cane's or even Zaxby's, that's a treat.
What did you have at Slim Chickens when you ate there?
Just the chicken tenders.
See, I like those. I like Raising Cane's, but to me, I like Slim Chickens more. And I don't know what it was. It just like their fries are really good. I mean, at Slim Chickens, I've never had anything bad. I've never had anything bad at Raising Cane's, but I feel like Raising Cane's, they're kind of comparable because they kind of have the same food. I think Raising Cane's is a little bit overrated. I think Slim Chickens needs more credit than they deserve. They're really underrated.
Hey, I'm cool with that.
If I had to give, Florida this year is underrated. Florida was a restaurant, there would be Slim Chickens because they're really underrated. They're not talked about like they need to.
Hey, I don't care what it is. We need either a Slim Chicken, Zaxby's, or Cane's in Huntington ASAP.
I would try my best to buy stock in Raising Cane's because they have a cult following. Or if they had like a Skyline in Huntington, dear God, that would be insane. But we're going to leave it. Slim Chickens is better than Raising Cane's. Thank you all so much for watching. See you all next time.